Great. Thanks for letting me come and share with you today. And it's good, I was mentioning to some folks earlier, it's good to see some familiar faces. Be back to a place that I'm relatively familiar with at this point, and spend some time with who I would call friends at this point. And so it's great to be back. This last time, if you had the opportunity to come to Artists Behind Cameras back in October, last time that I was here, we talked about Lightroom workflow. And while Lightroom workflow is important, and image processing workflow is an important thing to at least get the basics of as a photographer and a business owner, really that's just a band-aid to a much larger issue, which we're going to kind of delve into today. So I'm excited for the opportunity to share with you. We're not actually going to be talking about image processing. We're not going to even be talking about photography. I want to share with you what I think is a way more important concept as a business owner, as a photographer, and I think this will make an even bigger difference in your business in the year to come. I've had the opportunity to kind of chat with some of you, and you may know that I grew up in Japan. I spent about 10 years of my life in Japan, and it's an absolutely fascinating country. The people, the culture, the food, absolutely amazing. But one of the most interesting parts of the Japanese, or the country of Japan, or the Japanese culture, is the language. Now, the Japanese have 3 different alphabets. One is called hiragana, one is called katakana, and then the third is kanji. And kanji is the most complicated of all 3 alphabets that they have. And the kanji is made up, the kanji alphabet is made up of thousands of characters. Each one of the characters can have multiple meanings, 4 or 5 meanings. And in order to read a newspaper in Japan, you have to know a minimum of 2,000 characters. It's a pretty overwhelming language, but the language is extremely powerful in the way that it's able to communicate concepts and ideas. And this particular character that you see up on the screen here this evening is the character for life. And what I want to share with you today is how to have a life as a business owner. And not just a photographer, but as a business owner in general, how to have a life beyond the 60 to 80-hour work weeks that you may be experiencing at this point, the monotony, the lack of personal time, the lack of family time, how to have a life as a business owner. I have 2 kids. Addison is 6, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and then a 10-year-old son. His name is Austin. And they're absolutely incredible kids, very smart for their age. And, but about 3 years ago, I was walking into our family room, and we have this bright red couch in our family room, and I see my daughter standing next to the couch. I get a little bit closer to where she is, and a little bit closer to what it looked like she was doing, and sure enough, she had actually drawn a smiley face on the couch. And she hadn't just done this with a pencil or a ballpoint pen, but she'd actually written on the couch, drawn on the couch with a permanent marker. Now, my kids are well behaved and they're smart and they know better than to do something like this, so my initial response or my reaction was just utter surprise. I had no idea what in the world she was thinking drawing on the couch. Most parents would probably just go crazy, start yelling at their kids if they saw something like this, but it took me a second. I took a step back, and I asked the question, why? Why would my daughter, who knows much better than to be doing something like this, why would she draw a pretty good-sized smiley face on the couch with permanent marker? And when I took the time to ask why, and I realized that Addison, happy-go-lucky as she is, happy as she is, she couldn't help but kind of let that happiness out in the form, unfortunately, of permanent marker and a smiley face on the couch. But asking the question why gave me perspective to the situation. Now, a lot of business owners, photographers in particular, unfortunately don't take the time to ask why about what they do on a day-to-day basis. We can't talk about creating freedom for ourselves or having a life if we don't, first of all, take the time to ask the question why. Hing and I actually had a conversation about this morning. It's an interesting thing that a lot of photographers get into business without really thinking about why they're getting into business or why they're getting into the particular genre of photography that they're in, or why they're going off after a particular segment of the market. They haven't really taken the time to actually ask the question why. And sure, there can be surface answers to that question of why. Maybe you enjoyed the electronics. I know that I did. I love the idea of being able to buy a new fancy camera. Or maybe you just love the so-called art of photography. But I think we need to go a little bit deeper than that. And in order to answer that question, why am I even in business? Why does my business look like it does today? Why is this business model in existence right now? Why am I running my business this way? Why am I going after these clients? We really have to take a step back and create what I would consider, or what I would call, a big picture view. Now, I'm afraid of heights, and this is actually something that Hing and I also talked about today. I'm personally afraid of heights, and particularly the idea of falling off of something. We're in a tall building, looking over the edge down 500 feet, 1,000 feet, or if you translate that to meters, I guess 400 meters. That's a pretty frightening thing. Well, knowing that I was afraid of heights, I decided a few years back to kind of step outside the box and push my boundaries a little bit. And so I went hang gliding. Now, Chattanooga, where I live in Tennessee, southeast US, is home to one of the largest hang gliding parks in the US. And so I was able to go down to this hang gliding park and go on a tandem flight, hang gliding flight, with an instructor. So they set up the hang glider on what we would call a trike, basically a frame with wheels, set the hang glider down on this trike, hooked the hang glider up to an ultralight, a small plane, and we strapped into the harness. You can see the instructor is right below me. He's got straps on the side, or handles on the side of his harness that I can hold on to, and I'm strapped right above him. And that's really all that's holding on to us as we go, I would say probably about 600 or 700 meters into the air, actually probably closer to 800 meters into the air. And so we hook up to this ultralight, the ultralight takes off, it pulls us up, we get to about 600 or 700 meters, and the instructor says, okay, I want you to hold on really, really tight, because when we let this line go, when we cut this line from the ultralight, we're gonna dive. And we were at the time going about 35 miles an hour, so not going very fast. That would, I guess, translate to about 50K. And apparently we were going to drop to about 30K. And so he said, when we cut that line, hold on really tight, we're going to dive. And sure enough, we're flying along like this. They cut that line, and we turn, and we dive. And if you've ever been on a roller coaster before, you can multiply that experience times about 100, and you know what this experience might have been like. Pretty frightening, but ultimately absolutely amazing, absolutely incredible. But one of the most interesting things about this hang gliding flight, outside of the fact that I was able to push myself, push my boundaries, and experience flight, the closest thing to flight that I've ever experienced, true flight, was perspective. The perspective that I gain is I'm flying 600-700 meters above what is actually one of the largest mountains in the area that I live in, to be able to see the mountain from that perspective. This road that you see right here that's kind of running up and down the mountain is really a road that I've only experienced a little bit at a time in the past. I could see maybe to the next curve or the top of the next hill. But when you're up this high in the air, you gain a whole different perspective. You have an idea of where you might be going before you get there. And in order to answer that question of why are we even in business as business owners, or why have we created this particular business model, or why have we decided to go into this particular genre of photography, in order to answer that question effectively, we really have to take a step back and create what would be called a big picture view. Julie Morgenstern wrote a book called Time Management from the Inside Out. And she refers to the fact that no matter how hectic life gets, ultimately the most successful people in life have a big picture view that allows them to kind of rise above the chaos and maintain perspective. And I think many photographers, unfortunately, have not taken the time to develop that big picture view. They have no idea where they're going. They decided to get into photography because they like the idea of it. Maybe they like the electronics, or they like the artistic side of it. They were excited to get into photography, but they really ultimately created no big picture view for themselves, so they don't have any kind of direction. So what does their day-to-day workflow look like? Well, they wake up, they answer some email, they get on Facebook, they process some images, they play in Photoshop, maybe they get on Facebook again, or they get into their email again, call a few clients. But their day-to-day workflow, their week-to-week workflow is really a haphazard approach to business because they have no real direction. They don't really know where they're going. So I'd encourage you today, when we're talking about this idea of having a life, we really can't talk about how to have a life or create freedom for ourselves until we've actually taken a step backward and developed this big picture view that gives us some direction to move into. And I'd encourage you to do that. Go home tonight, take some time tomorrow morning, go to a cafe nearby, sit down for an hour or two, and really think about why you're doing what you're doing. And in order to answer that question accurately, what you have to do is think about where you want to be in a year, where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years. You need to establish this big picture view. And really, when we're talking about where we want to be and in a future time, really there are two aspects that you're going to be focused on. Where do you want to be financially, if you're taking notes? And number two, where do you want to be when it comes to time, regarding time? How much time are you spending in your business each week? Once you've taken the time to decide those two things, you can now go backwards. You can say, okay, if I'm going to be making this much, or I want to make this much money each year as a photographer, and I want to have this much time left in my week after I get all my work done, first of all, what type of photography do I have to go into? What genre of photography do I need to go into in order to create this lifestyle? And then secondly, what client or what market do I need to go after within that genre of photography that's going to also support this lifestyle? Does that make sense? You really can't go in any clear direction unless you've taken the time to establish that big picture view, establish your long-term goals personally. So I encourage you to do that. Take the time to create your big picture view, and it really doesn't have to take too long. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Decide where you want to be a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now. And that will give you some direction as you move forward with your business and as a photographer. So once we've taken the time to answer this question of why are we in business, and we've done so by taking a step back and developing a big picture view, the next thing that we can do is implement systems. I mentioned that I grew up in Japan, and I spent about 10 years of my life there. Prior to those 10 years, my dad actually spent about 18 years of his life there. He grew up in Japan. This is my dad over here on the left-hand side. And of course, my grandmother, she unfortunately passed away this past year. My grandfather here, he is 90 years old now, is extremely healthy, doing really well, and is excited about life. And then my aunt over here on the right-hand side. But if you look at this picture, aside from the fact that it's rich with history, at least for my family's sake anyway, I would venture to say that probably one of the first things that's going to strike you is that we're looking at a pretty conservative family. And you'd be right. This is a very disciplined family. My dad was brought up within a lot of structure, a lot of rules. And when my dad had his own family, this is me here on the bottom, and of course my dad up here, my mom and two of my brothers. This was probably when I was about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old in Japan. But my dad brought that discipline and that structure to our family. I can remember growing up, one of the things that he did to kind of incorporate the structure and discipline in our lives was to create checklists. We had responsibilities, and I ultimately had 3 brothers. We each had responsibilities, chores that we were supposed to accomplish each week. So he created a checklist that we could follow, and as long as we completed our tasks each week, we were to get a prize, whether that was being able to go buy ice cream or buy candy or spend time doing a particular activity with our parents. In fact, we even got to choose our favorite icon to go on each of these checklists to kind of personalize it. Okay? But this is the kind of structure and the systems that my dad implemented in our life. Now, the cool thing about systems is that it does drive direction, or it gives us direction and helps us manage that direction as we're running business and running our personal lives. Unfortunately, if you get too caught up in the rules and the structure and the systems, it can drive your personal relationships apart. And unfortunately, my dad and I have never been extremely close, even to this day. But I will say on the positive side that if I were to pick one thing that made a massive difference in my life, even to this day, it was this idea of discipline and structure, and ultimately systems. Now, systems are ultimately a set of principles, ideas that drive the way that we do something. And I would say more than just an organized set of principles, but a simple set of organized principles, repeatable principles, easily teachable principles that drive what we do on a day-to-day basis. Systems are extremely important, really for, I think, 2 different reasons. Number one, they do give us structure in our day. They drive, or they create structure both, actually not just for our day, but our work week. They give us structure around which to build our workflow. And secondly, they give us ultimately a place to manage our data, to kind of unload our mind. We're dealing with a lot of information these days, going through Facebook and blogs and Twitter and so forth. We're taking in a lot of information. And as business owners, we have a lot of tasks to manage, a lot of things to keep up with. Having the correct systems in place allow us a place to manage all of that information and manage all that data. Those are the 2 purposes of systems. Now, if you're taking notes, this is something to jot down. I think the 4 areas of our business that it's extremely important, actually our personal life as well, 4 areas of our business and personal life that it's extremely important to develop systems for. Number 1 is task management, task and project management. How many of you use a task or project manager at this point? Anybody? Wow, okay. We have a lot to keep up with as business owners, and the idea that we're keeping up with that in our head clutters our mind ultimately and keeps us from being as creative as we could be. It's also not a real reliable way of keeping up with a lot of information. If you're writing down a task here or an idea here or something you need to keep up with on this piece of paper and it gets lost or thrown away accidentally, we've now just lost that information. So I would highly recommend implementing a task and project management system, ideally an electronic system, because it means that it's automatically backed up, especially if it's online. Automatically backed up, you have easy access to it ideally everywhere you go, whether it's on the web or your computer or your phone. Implementing a task and project management system is extremely important. That would be the number 1 area that I'd recommend, creating a system for yourself in your business and in your personal life. The second area would be time management. Now, if you've implemented an effective task and project management system in your business, the time management really can be a minor secondary thing to the task and project management. You've got some structure with your tasks in place that you don't need to over-schedule yourself or get too concerned about the details of a daily schedule. There's a book called Getting Things Done. If you're a reader of business books, Getting Things Done by David Allen talks about how to implement tasks or task and project management in such a way that you don't have to be so concerned about schedules. And it's nice to have flexibility as business owners, and I know personally having kids and keeping up with taking them to school and sports and so forth, schedules to work around, that you have the flexibility of not being stuck to a schedule every day. But I have personally created a basic structure, a very simple structure for time that I implement generally on a daily basis. So the way that it goes is ideally I'm going to wake up at about 6:30 in the morning, get some breakfast, get my kids off to school by about 8 o'clock, a workout in by 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then for the first probably 3 to 4 hours of my day, I'm going to be focusing on something that we're going to be talking about here in just a second. That is the idea of proactive tasks, things that are going to actually build my business. About 3:30 or so in the afternoon, it's my communication time, my talking time. So I'm dealing with returning phone calls, responding to email. This is my communication time of the day. So for about an hour to an hour and a half or so, I have time to manage that communication. And that's about it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple schedule. My tasks and project management system drives the rest of what I do. But that would be the second area that I would implement a system, a schedule, time management. The third area to implement a system in would be data management. How many of you have a paperless office? Okay, yeah, one person? It's 2012. It's time to go that direction. We have the technology, in fact, we've had the technology in place now for years to have a paperless office. Really a personal life as well, but at least with your business, managing your clients' contracts, invoices. In fact, all of the financial management, which I'm going to touch here on here in just a second, should be electronic. We haven't had a client folder or, in fact, even a filing cabinet to manage all of our client contracts and consultation documents, etc., for years now, because everything gets scanned in and digitized. And I use a system called Evernote that allows me to be able to manage my paperless workflow and my data management. So data management is really, really important area of your business that you should be implementing a system for. And I'm not going to get into a detailed workflow this evening. If you've got questions afterward about how I implement that data management system using Evernote, I'd be glad to answer those questions at that point. So we've got task and project management systems, time management systems, data management, and then the last would be financial management. And you'd think this would be a given, particularly for a business owner, that they have a system in place to manage the finances, the numbers, the money. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And I'm surprised, actually, and I would assume it's the case here. Back in the States, you still talk to people that manage their money, and if you can call it managing their money, on paper. They're doing their books on paper. They're still keeping track of the books themselves rather than hiring an accountant whose profession it is to manage the money. They're trying to manage that themselves in addition to running every other aspect of their business. Not a smart idea. So creating a system in which you manage your finances both on a personal and a business level is extremely important. So those are the 4 areas that I would recommend implementing systems. in order to create freedom for yourselves, in order to have a life. I personally don't want to actively work any more than, I'd say maybe 10 or 15 hours in a week. In order for me to be at that place, it's important, first of all, that I have a direction, a big picture view, so I know the direction that I'm going, and that's going to drive everything that I do. But then, in order to get to that place, I have to implement systems. And systems in those four areas that I just mentioned, I think, are the most important. Okay?